Hello, Steve. Good morning.
Where am I?
Our numbers are building up. We're at 27, and which is sort of the average, close to the average we usually have. And I see some new faces or names, which is kind of great.
Deborah's a heck of a draw, so you know.
What do you think we asked her for? So Deborah, is John listening in now?
Absolutely.
Good enough. Good morning, John.
Howdy.
Good afternoon, whatever.
Good morning, everybody.
And
Morning, Steve.
And another reminder to please mute yourself if you're not talking. I hate to mute people because I don't want to make them like feel excluded, but. Woo, look at those numbers climb.
Oh my goodness. It's amazing what advertising will do, huh?
You get a big name for your headliner, and here we go.
Well, that's all we've been doing. Hey, Barry.
Hey, Don.
Got 5 more to go, Deborah, and then you're going to hold the record.
Well, for here we have already, I think, haven't we?
Yeah, 39 was our record here.
Plus, we have some new countries, I think, too. I'm not sure, which is always great. So we got a minute to go. I noticed on class today that finally got there at the very beginning, and Ted's much more professional with the countdown timer and everything else. I was impressed with that, but I like the informality of this anyway.
Oh, 1 to go, Deborah. 1 to go.
Not really. We could.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I have about 5 more computers I could log in with.
No, that would be cheating.
Can you do that? Can you log in with 2 computers on your same name?
Yes, you can. It might assign a different name. You can do a computer login and a phone login on the same as well.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
But then you might run into a horrible feedback noise.
Yeah.
You'll have to mute one of the mics.
Actually, yeah, mics and speakers. Can't have 2 speakers either.
As a matter of fact, you wouldn't need 2 mics and 2 speakers. In fact, you wouldn't need 2 computers. I wasn't sure why. Actually, one would show the presenter and the other would show the gallery with people. Anyway, we're a minute late. I really hate to start things on time. I'm always socially appropriately late. We have yet another special guest speaker today. From Texas. I'm trying to find you, Deborah. You were on my screen a minute ago. Oh, there you are. Hello. I've had, a week or 2 to think of an introduction for Deborah, and I'm not doing very well at it, but Deborah is a member of Caller Lab, member of the Board of Governors, an accredited caller coach, an outstanding caller, and has been for many years. An original California person, but now in Texas. And a woman caller who happens, or a caller who happens to be a woman. I hope you're okay with that with that definition, I think it was yours that we came up with. We'll see where you decide to take this. And without embarrassing myself any further, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah. Deborah, take it away. And again, keep your questions and your thoughts open because Deborah will be leading a discussion after her presentation. Go for it.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it very much. When we were discussing what to call this session, I said, why don't we name it after a movie I had just recently seen about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is one of our Supreme Court justices here in the USA. And the title of the movie was On the Basis of Sex. And that made Don a little nervous. He wasn't sure what kind of people would be logging in, so he decided to title it this. But the movie was fabulous. And when we were watching the beginning of it, John and I were watching it together, and there's my husband, John Jones. There's all these men in their little matching suits and ties and white shirts, and they're all walking, same haircut, they're all a huge crowd of them walking toward this building. And in the midst of them walking along is Ruth. And I said to John, oh, that looks just like my first caller lab. All these men and me. And I'm sure it wasn't like that, but that's sort of the feeling that I got. When I started calling 38 years ago, there were maybe 8 to 10% of the total calling population was women. Now it's more 20, maybe 25%. So we are gaining. And in this movie, when they went into the big lecture hall and sat down, of course, she's completely surrounded by men, and she begins to look around to see if there's any other women in the crowd. And there were 2 others, and they were also looking around, trying to see, is there anyone there who looks like me? And when we market and promote square dancing, we want people that have never tried it to look at the people that participate and think, there's somebody there that looks like me. So this might be something that I could try or I would enjoy. So we were looking for each other, but my first caller lab was, I was being introduced to a lot of the movers and shakers because I had a young caller in California who, he and his wife knew everybody who was anybody. And he always went to caller labs, so he wanted to take me and introduce me. And this was in Phoenix in 1985. And at that convention, which is kind of funny, somebody else who lives in this house was getting an award on the banquet night. Somebody else who lives in this house? And we were about maybe 600 of us at that convention. And John Jones was awarded his milestone award that night. So that's the first time I ever saw him, but I was one of the newbies, and so I was way back in the cheap seats and didn't get to see all that much or know all that much. But anyways, that was my first introduction to a big group of people and the gender differences, the huge overbalance of men to women within the calling field. And the question occurred to me when I was talking with Don, do you as a man consider yourself a caller or a male caller? Which is a ridiculous question. Of course, you think of yourself as a caller. Your male identity and gender is clicked in because that's what men do that are involved in square dancing, they call. But what about the women? When they look at being a caller and coming into such a hugely dominated male field, do they look at themselves as a caller who happens to be a woman or a woman caller? Because there's a big difference between the two. And the skills that you need to have as a caller are the same. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years old, if you're male or female, it makes absolutely no difference. You have to have the same skills. You need to know how to move the people around. You need to have control of your choreography. You need to know formations and arrangements. You need to be able to resolve a square. Those kind of skills are even across the board. But there are other subtle differences that kind of come peeking their way in there. And one of them for me was trying to learn how to recognize and use sequence when calling and resolving the square. And I would ask the guys, what do you see? How do you tell? Well, you just see it. Oh, that was very helpful. Thank you so very much. I can now go out and, you know, and get those $2,000 festivals with that information. Thank you. Well, they couldn't define what they saw because they just saw it. But here's what was going on, guys. And if you're working with women callers, you may not have realized this. When you look at your squared set and you pick out your two adjacent couples that you're going to key off of, most of the time, or at least it was like this, most of the time it was couple number 1 and couple number 4. Okay, the number 1 man's corner was lady number 4. Many male coaches thought that women would look at lady number 4 and her corner, man number 1. That isn't what I looked at all. And also many men thought they tracked the number 1 man, they follow him around because they learned to dance that part to begin with. Now maybe they can dance both sides now, but when they first started learning to call, that was what they tracked. I, as a woman dancer, I learned the right-hand lady side, the right-hand person's side. And so when I began to track people, I tracked the number 1 lady. Not the number 4 lady. I still had the same primary couple, but I was tracking her. And so I looked for her corner, which is man number 2. Now, when men are looking at the sequence state of the square, and if they've picked couple number 1, it doesn't have to be this way. I'm talking 38 years ago, and this is kind of what everybody did. The number 1 couple and couple number 4, your sequence state, guys, goes to the left. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody like nod your heads or click your bar or something. Okay, thank you. My sequence state goes to the right. That made it difficult for me to understand sequence, even though there's nothing right or wrong about either way, but it was different. So it took me longer to get my talons into being able to recognize and manipulate and identify sequence. That's just one of the things that is different about how a male mind and a female mind may look at the same situation. There may be a difference, and neither one of us is wrong. And that came home to me one time. John and I would do choreography riding along in the car. He'd say, okay, here, track this. And he'd give me a sequence. And he'd say, okay, where are you? And I'd say, I'm over here. No, that's not right. Do it again. So, blah, 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 blah. Where are you? I'm over here. No, you're not. You're over here. And I said, no, I'm not. And we're 2 caller coaches, you know, so we're kind of, and so we did it about the 3rd time. And finally, he said to me, who are you tracking in this sequence? And I said, the number 1 lady. Who are you tracking? And he said, the number 1 man. So yes, we were at opposite ends and we were both right. So that's one thing that we've learned to identify and respect from the other, and tried to learn, me a little bit more to track the man and him a little more to track the lady, because neither one is wrong. We just look at it a little bit different. Now, I was also thinking about, do we put our gender first or do we put our gender second with what we do? One of the goals that I set for myself when I first started calling 38 years ago is I wanted to be accepted as a good caller, not a good female caller. So for me, my gender came after. That's not necessarily the way that people perceive you. And I hope that really hits home. The dancers, when you walk into the hall and you're going to call a dance, do they go, oh, so it's a male caller? If you're a man, no, just that's the caller. But there have been so many times people come in and they see me and they go, "Are you the cure?" "No, I don't cue." "Oh," but they see me up there with the equipment and they wonder, well, what is this woman doing messing around in important technical stuff? Because they haven't seen a woman do that before. When women disc jockeys and weather reporters and traffic reporters began to be heard on the radio, that was big stuff here in the US, because we were always used to hearing a male voice. Only a man could do that, of course. But then the women began to come in and you kind of went, it was a different sound, but the information was the same. So what difference did it make? And we got used to it. When we come into a dance to call the dance, for my club, it's different because they know it's me all the time and that's who they're expecting. But when I go into a different area and the dancers come into the room and they see me on stage and they realize, oh my gosh, that's the caller. What are they thinking? That's a caller who happens to be a woman, or that's a woman caller? They are probably thinking that's a woman caller. And so every time, what the responsibility mantle is that is placed on our shoulders as women callers is that every time we pick up the microphone, we're picking it up for every other woman caller who will come after us. You don't have to worry about that as a guy. Because if you have a dance and, I don't know, you're sick or it's just not your best dance, maybe you had a little trouble finding that corner, you kept trying to take the number 1 man to the number 2 lady and doggone it, it just wasn't working. Whatever, we all have those nights. But the dancer, if they're really frustrated, they may say to their partner, I don't like that guy. I don't want to dance to him again. But they don't say, I don't want to dance to any men callers again as long as I live. They don't say that. But if it's a woman and they don't have a good time, what do they say? I don't like women callers. So that mantle is on our shoulders every time we pick up a microphone, guys. And maybe that isn't something that you've ever had to be aware of, but I'm telling you, it exists. I wish it didn't, but it does. But one of the greatest compliments that I get is when a dancer will come up to me and say, you know, I don't like women callers, but I like you. And that makes me go, yes, because the next time that a woman gets up and is on the microphone to call that square dance, that guy may give her a second chance. He may be a little more open to the fact that it's a female behind the microphone. And it would be lovely if we could just say this doesn't exist anywhere else, and it doesn't exist in our calling field, but it exists outside. And that thought came to me earlier today when I was trying to gather my thoughts for what I was going to talk about. And I thought, if you're in the hospital and you have a nurse that's assigned to you, and your nurse comes in and it's a man, do you think, oh, it's my nurse, who also happens to be a man? Or do you think, male nurse, and the gender gets slapped before the job? And it's not something that we do intentionally. Sometimes we kind of have to train ourselves not to do that. But what about pilots? When you get on a plane and you hear that the pilot is on, the pilot has boarded the plane, are you kind of expecting a man? Of course you are. Of course, it's natural, because the great majority of men that are, of pilots are men. But it kind of makes me go, yeah, when they announce the names of the pilot and it's a woman's name. Like, yeah, one for us. So it's just as we become more common within gender-dominated fields, like nursing is mostly women, and pilots, for example, those are just the things that came to me, are mostly men. What about preschool and kindergarten teachers? What do you expect? You expect a woman, don't you? Mm-hmm. And when you walk in, you take your little precious shiny penny of a child that you fixed her hair and you've got her all dressed, you've taken her to her first day of kindergarten and she's leaving you, and there's a man standing there. holy moly, do I want to turn my child over to a man? You see that gender identity can come through because the majority of people that are in that field are of the other gender, and that's what we're expecting. So I had some notes here. I've talked just about my 15, 16 minutes, and I did come out with if you forgive me to go a couple minutes longer. I looked up online. I can tell you a million stories. I could take up the entire hour of how I have been treated well and mistreated due to my gender. So what? But how do you succeed in a male-dominated field? And this goes for women in business, women in education. I didn't see anything going the other way, how to succeed in a female-dominated field, but I did find this. And I just want to read these out, just the list, kind of quick. Become a person of value. Instead of a hanger-on or somebody that's watching from the outskirts. Get involved, learn your craft, and become a person of value. The person that's doing the best recruiting, or the person that does extra things for their club that make them enjoy that sociability part. Let your voice be heard. Don't be afraid to speak up. Speak with confidence. I saw on one of these lists that women are much more inclined to allow themselves to be interrupted. And state your case. You don't have to be a people pleaser. You don't have to try to please everybody. And I love number 5, know your stuff and then some. You want to be respected as a square dance caller. You've got to be doubly educated. You've got to have a great voice. You've just got to make sure that you've got all those technical things and the artistic things. You've got those ducks not only in your pond, but they are in formation. So you know that you can trust yourself. And that's how you will earn respect, is when you know when other people know that you know what you're doing. Learn how to handle conflict. Take on a leadership role. I love seeing the women get involved in callers associations and taking positions of leadership. And also in Color Lab, we've had a female chairman of the board. We have our wonderful Women in Calling Committee. We have a fantastic woman music producer. This is great stuff. And they wear that mantle every single time they do anything. Don't be afraid to ask for a promotion or to be involved in something that you know that you have earned your right for. And this one is super important, super important. Find a sponsor. You have to have someone who believes in you. And in our case, it needs to be a man. Why? Because there's not very many women that have the power and the influence to promote and actually be able to open doors for other women. We can do it some, but if it hadn't been for the men in my background that believed in me and supported me and let me cry on their shoulder when stuff went bad and helped me figure things out, and I wouldn't have done anything. It was a man who told me, you need to go to Color Lab. What woman would have told me that? Nobody. What woman would have been able to introduce me to all these guys and say, hey, this gal's really coming up in California. You need to learn her name. Couldn't have been another woman. So get a guy and someone whose respect you have earned, and they will help open those doors for you. And then you can't ever turn around and pay it back. There's no way to do that. So you have to pay it forward. You have to reach out your hand and extend and help somebody else get going and get started. And lead by example. If this is what you believe in, you gotta walk the walk if you're gonna talk the talk. Okay, so I'll hush now and let y'all with questions or stories that you wanna share or whatever. Let her rip.
I noticed.
Mute button is on. Great.
I just took a rough count of the number of women callers versus men callers we have here. And I'm guessing roughly 40% women.
19 out of 45, Don.
How much is it?
19 out of 45. I don't know why, but I felt like counting it too.
Yeah.
Somebody divide that and see how close my 40% was. Anyway, I think there's two reasons for that. One is because we have Deborah presenting and the topics seem to be interesting. Two is that we are having more and more women callers all the time, which is one of the reasons I suggest Deborah do this. But I'm also glad to see that I was working on a title for the presentation that wouldn't make all the men go away because they thought it was only for women. And I'm glad to see we have 60% men rather. So good crowd.
So, maybe talk a little bit about how we can be better allies.
For me, I enjoyed having the guys that would help me with the patter part of calling was not something that came super easy to me. Maybe it does to, I don't think it does to all men, but I don't know if it's just where our brains are wired or whatever. But it was guys that would take time to sit and push we had dolls in those days, never have used a computer for choreography, but just to drop an idea here or there, or talk about how to apply a certain singing call. And I encourage all women, if you have a singing call that you just feel like, well, that's a guy song, don't be afraid to change the words. No, the lyric police are not going to come running, thundering into your dance and cuff you and take you away because you have changed some of the lyrics in order to make it more appropriate or fun or funny for you. So I think that a woman caller is probably a little timid to ask for much help. So the man or anybody reaching out and saying, hey, I'd like to help you. And if you'd like to work together, we can work on a certain call or, and just the offer. And then that person has to take it or let it lay. But reaching out would be a big help.
If I could interject, sorry, I was just saying, if I could interject, I want to add a little bit to what Dawn was saying. One of the things that I've noticed since I started mentoring is the expectation of gender bias towards women. For some reason, there's a lower expectation of what women callers can do, and that prevails. And where that bias comes is exactly what you're saying, is the support. But we as male callers tend to foster that bias a lot of the time in the way we introduce women callers. I'll get up on the stage and it says, and it's really good to have a woman caller on the stage, man. I'd like to introduce you to Deborah Carroll-Jones. We've already set, no, here's a fantastic caller from Texas. No, we said it's good to have more women in the call. And immediately we've created that perception of a lower expectation. This is a novelty. This is somebody lower down in the development stage. And we've introduced you as a novelty rather than as a professional. And that's something that I've been fighting against that wall for about 20 years now. The other thing is women call, I've noticed this in the actual calling. And the only thing I can really liken it to is the difference. If you ever watch quilting, my wife does quilting and sewing, or guitar playing or everything, it's always geared for right-handed people. For choreography is geared for men. Mm-hmm. And I use the adage of round dancing. God created women to dance backwards. And if you look at round dancing, forward two-step, what direction is the woman traveling? She's dancing backwards. It's just the methodology of it. And within that, I've noticed that women callers tend to screw the number 1 and the number 3 man with overflow, whereas male callers tend to overflow the number 2 and the number 4 lady. And that's where you can really see where that perception difference is. It's just something to be aware of. What's been your experience with that?
Well, I think you're 100% on. if you bring out gender when you're introducing a caller, you have immediately stamped her with that label. If you introduce somebody, I mean, I wouldn't say, hey guys, look what we've got all the way from Australia. It's a man and it calls. You know, we wouldn't do that. But those little subtle phrases can make all the difference in the world. And I know that I, as a woman choreographer, had to watch that I did not overflow the choreography for the men, because I was tracking and providing this beautiful figure 8 flow for the women. And I have to admit that there was probably a time or two I went, I don't care if they get corkscrewed into the ground. They can just see how it feels. But as I grew in my calling, I realized, well, you know, I do have to be able to be good for both. So what does that mean? That means I have to be able to dance and track both sides. What does that mean for a male caller? Well, you better be able to do the same, because whoever it is that gets the short end of that stick just very likely could be the person who does the hiring for next time. And if you've made them mad, or you've made them uncomfortable, or you've made them dizzy, you're not going to be in their top 3 for wanting to come back. So both sides should be understood by the caller, that they should be able to step in and dance either side with equal familiarity. I'm not saying that a man will be able to be swung by another man and have it look lovely, or that when the caller calls roll away, that the man would roll beautifully away. That's probably not going to happen. But the fact that he understands the kinesiology of what he's asking the women to do is important. Thank you, Mel.
I've got
Deborah.
3 comments. One is, Mel, when you talk about introducing people, I'm worried about going back to listening to the recording of this and seeing how I introduced Deborah. I can't remember whether it was appropriate or not, but time will tell. We're 2 is, as far as overflow for the women instead of the men. When I wrote the book Out of Sight, I did a lot of following the man. And later on, many years later, I happened to pick it up, just open to a random page and read a sequence. And I was much more aware of what choreography was at the time. That's not quite the right wording. And I noticed that that's great for the man. I think it might be overflow for the women. And I mentally, or with my dolls, or physically danced the women's part of that 2-couple sequence that I had just presented. And it's probably my example of the worst case of overflow that I've ever seen. So in the second printing, I didn't change it, but in the afterward, I made note of it, and as a precaution that, you know, if you aren't careful, you're going to do this, get up and try dancing that one. And it's a really good point you brought out, Deborah, is that, you know, we may have more men callers than we have women callers, but dancer-wise, it's about 50-50. Not exactly, but it's about 50-50. And so half of our audience, we ought to be entertaining more than just half of our audience. The last thing I wanted to bring up is kind of a change of subject, but Deborah and I were talking about this on the session, and I asked, why is it necessary for what Shauna has nicely done now of producing 2 different versions of music, one for men and one for women? Because it used to be you didn't have, you know, it'd be out of your range, but now you nicely have pitch controls in your square dance, you know, that'll change pitch without changing speed, without changing tempo. And Deborah explained nicely to me that it's more than just changing pitch. Do you want to comment on that, or do you want Shauna to comment on that?
I can, well, is Shauna here? Because I can only see a certain number.
I saw that Shauna's name was there. I didn't.
I saw Shauna earlier.
Her picture was muted. I don't know about her name.
She is still logged on.
Speak up, Shauna. I heard you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Your camera's not on, but your mic is.
Well, I'm not turning the camera on.
Happy Memorial Day weekend.
The camera is not coming on. That's a fact.
What happened to if you're going to be a caller, you got to be willing to embarrass yourself, Shauna?
Oh, been there, done that. So, Deborah, if you don't mind, I'll just jump in.
Sure.
Absolutely, I hear it all the time. Absolutely, you can change the pitch with the computer. But the average range of the male voice and the average female voice are +5 to +7 or -5 to -7 apart. Yeah, those are half steps or clicks in the computer software. And if you had to do that for every single song, you would hear what we're hearing in the music, especially with certain instruments, a harmonica, a saxophone, the drum track. It damages the music. And if there's any background vocals, forget about it. Because now you've got chipmunks or Johnny Cash. I got Vic Tibbetson over here. So to get into your sweet spot, which is a term that I love, Deborah and Patty did a session at Color Lab on finding your sweet spot. And to go ±1 or 2, you don't damage the music so much to get right into, where your sweet spot in your voice is. But for a female to get into a sweet spot with most of the male tracks, it's my go-to is +5. And so now everybody can have music that they don't have to destroy the music to enjoy the song.
It's so nice to be able to have music that you can use that's pure, that you don't have to sacrifice any part of it because it's in that perfect spot for you to be able to play with. And if you do have to adjust it a half tone one way or the other, is not going to have that big of an impact. But I feel like for the first time, I have real music that I can use.
One of the big things that I've seen coming out with a lot of recordings in what they're calling the female range, there's also a lot of male callers that are picking up the songs in the female range. And mainly it is because men tend to have a different vocal range as far as the stretch goes, because we've had to practice that for such a longer period of time. But what's really nice about the lady callers is with that range expansion, it used to be the expectation on a lady caller was we're going to get everything sung in a high C with a falsetto chord, and now it's your voice coming out. It's not you trying to sing to the choir. It's you being you. And we've taught that to male callers. If you want Don Beck to call, hire Don Beck. Don't hire Mel Wilkerson pretending to be Don Beck. Well, now we can hear Deborah Carroll, not Deborah Carroll pretending to be Mel Wilkerson, because she'd never do that anyway, because she's miles above where I am. But I'm listening to Deborah instead of Deborah doing Mel's record in a high C that is not made for her. So that is a big advantage for lady callers, because they have as much range diversion as men do.
Yeah, and Mel, just to your point, when we choose the key for each of the male and female vocal tracks, we're looking at the average male range and the average female range. There are outliers for every one. And Mike Sikorsky is a good example. He's got a very low range. And I think Deborah would say that early on she liked to choose his records because they were better for her.
I could do them an octave up.
Right. So I do have men with low voices, and I think Dan is one of them, who buys the female range because it's better for them. And some females with very low voices like the male range, So there's always exceptions. We're looking at the averages, and with those averages, you can ±1 or 2 instead of 5 to 7 to get to your sweet spot.
Shauna, do you do the same instrumentation, same arrangements pretty much on the male and female?
For the most part, Don, the things that are done digitally, are going to be pretty much the same. All of the live instruments, they're played twice. And so, you know, we don't listen to one and say, okay, replicate that in this new key. So you'll hear differences in the music. And sometimes when it's done, I'll go, man, I really like that lick there, and I like this one over here. And it's fun to listen to the differences. In some cases, we purposely make them different. The first release of You're No Good, if you listen to the female range, it was done more like Linda Ronstadt and kind of a bluesy style, but the male key was more grungy because Van Halen had recorded it. And so we just played with it. So you'll always hear differences when we're doing background vocals. You have to stack them differently in a new key. You know, the chords get stacked differently, and so they're never exactly the same.
On behalf of 40% of the people in this session, thank you very much, Shauna, for doing that.
My question is, when are you going to start doing some in a B flat?
Julie Burr had a question.
I would like to loop back to what Dan asked a couple minutes ago about how can men help females on stage or off stage to be more upfront for the dances. And one thing would be awareness. Be aware that we are coming in different size, shapes, and ages, and don't underestimate us just because we don't fit the perfect mold of the caller you're expecting.
I'd also like to interject. I think as a woman, we need mentors, we need men, but there's also a lot of men that need mentors also. And I think the mentors, people that are willing to take on that role, need to step up and really show how willing they are to help.
I'm in total agreement with that one, Katie. One of the biggest things I've been pushing for the last 15, 20 years is experienced callers mentoring new callers. And the biggest hiccup I have every time I've gone to a session where you've got experienced callers and you've got a new lady caller there, the whole gravitation of experience is focused on the lady caller. And it doesn't matter. I can have 5 new callers in a room. Every experienced caller is going to be trying to help that woman caller. And where it really come to the fore is there's a new caller here in New South Wales, can't do singing calls, mainly because she's just afraid of her own voice. And her apology is, well, I can only call patter. I'm not very good at singing calls. Her patter's phenomenal. Every caller is going, oh, well, we can help you with that. We can help you with that. We can help you. And they ignore the other 4 callers that say, well, I don't really understand formation. I don't really understand. Yeah, but she's a woman caller. She needs more help. Getting experienced callers past that biased mindset is very, very difficult. I have no idea
I've seen the exact opposite.
Yeah, same here.
I've seen the exact opposite, that they're taking the, oh, well, she's just a girl.
Yes,
exactly. You know, she's not really trying to learn.
That's not mentoring. That's just poor professionalism.
Well, there's a lot of
it happens. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
That especially if you're younger or new in the business, that you try to get in the crowd and give a comment, and you get just slipped over and talked over. And one example would be Deborah. You organized the Women in Calling Caller School last year, and I think there was a particular reason for it, and I think it would be nice if you would tell us here what the reason was.
The Caller School, the Women in Calling Institute, was a dream of mine that I was finally able to put together last year in Richmond, I believe we were in. And I wanted a school for only women, taught by only women coaches. And the reason I did is because there's an unspoken atmosphere that changes when there's male dynamics that come in. And it needed to be a completely safe place for women to ask questions, to say, I don't get this in any way, shape, or form. It was a way to help women bring their voices down out of the stratosphere and trust their speaking voice in a singing capacity. We were able to do that for a lot of the women. And it was very, very well received. It sold out so quickly, it was unbelievable. And they got to see other women in our business in positions of leadership, and that we do know what we're doing, that we can help our sister callers. And of course, like I said, the skills that you need to know are the same, but the way in which they are approached, or the way in which the student is allowed to ask their questions and not be looked down upon, or just, there she goes again. None of that came in, because it was all women, so it really had nothing to do with one gender putting another gender down, either way. And I was extremely strict about the fact that men were not permitted to speak at the school. If you had a caller who brought her partner, and her partner also happened to be a caller, yay, we're glad to have you. We're so happy you're here to support your caller. And we love having people to be able to dance, but you don't get to say anything. And that was really tough. But it put the onus aside, so that it was all on the women, and they had all the time. They didn't have to share it with somebody that was trying to reach in and grab some more time for themselves. There's going to be another school in Dallas next year. We have our Caller Lab convention at the Hyatt Regency, DFW, and we're going to do a caller school Thursday night, Friday all day, Saturday all day, Sunday morning goodbye dance. And the information is on the IAGSDC Facebook page, and it's also on the Women in Calling Facebook page. And we've got women, as soon as the news went out, boom, I've already got somebody signed up and paid. I've got 2 other people that have said, send me a form, I want to get registered. So I think that it's going to be just as well received. And what I loved was we had so many men callers that were coming there, came early to Caller Lab, and they would come tippy-toeing in and they would watch. And they did that because they thought maybe there's something there that we can learn, so that we help women in a way that is better for them, and it will help it be easier for them to succeed. So they were watching so that they could go back and help the gals that they had. But in this instance, it was kind of cloistered. It was only women, and all of the women that attended said it was fantastic. So thank you for that. Thank you for asking.
Deborah, you mentioned that when you first started the call that you focused on the number one lady. After 35 years of calling, are you still following the number one lady?
Yes, that's just what I see. That's what I'm used to. But
okay.
If I look out at a square, if I'm looking out to have a primary couple and a secondary couple, if it's lady number 2 who happens to stand out to me for whatever reason, perhaps she and her partner may be the only ones in the square that are wearing matching colors. So my brain is going to go to her. I go to her corner, not his corner. In the couple, the woman is always the key person for me, and I go for her corner. Because when it comes to resolving, since the women are transient in the square, and they have to assume whatever, if they're a side lady to begin with and they happen to be dancing with a head man, okay, all of a sudden now they're a head lady. They can move all around, but the men have the permanent sequential home position, and the women don't. They have to go home with whoever happens to have them at the time. So if I get her to her partner and I've got her corner, man, I'm gold. So for me, it was a more fail-safe way to look at resolution. So it's not always the number one lady if there's someone else in the square that is flashier, if that makes any sense.
It actually does, Deborah, because one of the things I've looked at in resolution techniques across the board, we as male callers tend to focus on a technique which says, okay, pair up the key couple, you're looking at man number 1, number 4. But when you peel them back to their base essence, you're putting everybody in a position and you're really resolving off the corner lady or one lady in the square. And the reason is, once you peel it back, everybody is where you put them. You're only actually watching that one lady. She's either has her partner or she doesn't, or she either has her corner or she doesn't. And it's the same basic technique. It's just the perception of, instead of looking left, looking right. But the focus, even looking left, is exactly the same when you peel it right down to the very basic. You're working off resolving from one lady.
Correct.
Deborah, it's Alan Kerr from Australia. I call with a lady caller in my group, and I'm not sure which way she follows, but she often dances half sashayed a lot. And I wonder whether you comment on that, whether it's sort of because she may be following the number 1 lady.
If she's dancing half sashayed, she may have been taught originally to track the man, the number 1 man. And so for her, dancing half sashayed, that gets her mind into more understanding where he's going and where he is in the square. It also may be more comfortable for her to be able to see sequence in that way. As far as all women callers, I think that they should be able to dance both sides. How can you teach something you can't do? So if you're trying to teach classes and you want the men to do something, by golly, you better know what hand, where the weight shift is, what foot they start with, and then you better be able to switch right over and do it for the lady as well. The lady's going to come easier because you dance that side more often. So I think it's good practice to dance both sides.
Clarification, Alan.
What it makes also is, just for the men in our discussion to understand, I have no problem starting to follow the number 1 lady and switching during the pattern to follow the number 1 man or any other man who's struggling maybe in the square, for helping him more. But when it comes to resolving, I just switch back to the lady, or if I'm comfortable with that, hey, I can resolve with him, it's no problem. So it's a back and forth constantly.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the woman caller may be doing half sashayed because she doesn't realize that it's half sashayed, because if you've learned to dance both sides and have been doing it for so long, neither side feels weirder than the other. Like, I hear wrong way grand and I think, oh, am I going the wrong way? It doesn't feel wrong to me. In that moment, there's nothing wrong about it. When I'm calling, I have to think, oh, they're going the wrong way, because I don't recognize that it's not the normal.
When I teach mental image calling, back before there were many women in it, but would mention to the men, because if you're really good at following mental image stuff, and you're following an active man, and there are certain spots on the floor you have to move them to, the rules are exactly the same for women, except there's a different facing direction and a different spot you have to move them to. And I tell men that if you really want to give variety, you're really comfortable with this, but you want to give variety in your choreography without memorizing anything new, follow an active woman and dance her to her Alaman spot. And it will feel totally different to the dancers, because you're doing this from a different perspective.
I think that works in life, Don. If you want to change your entire life, follow an active woman.
Speaking of that, I just wanted to mention to Deborah, the first, because I have an active woman that I live with that I follow. The first caller lab that you went to in Phoenix is also the first one that Gail went to. Yeah, I neither of us realized that. I was concentrating on Gail, not you. But
Well, you should have been.
We remember that convention fondly. The desert.
Yes, I do too. I love the fact that I mean, who would know? It's very serendipitous that this caller that was getting his milestone that night would end up being my husband, you know, in future years. That was kind of weird. And then in 2017, we were back in Phoenix again, correct? Weren't we? Mesa, Phoenix? Okay, Phoenix area. And John,
we haven't been back to Phoenix exactly.
Okay, wanted me to say that that is when I received my milestone award. And so it's just strange how that tapestry all kind of came together, the circumstances. Yeah, same city for both of us.
Another anecdote was that in, I don't know, 1970, I went to a caller school in Colorado. Frank Lane, Earl Johnston, Jerry Haig, Burl Maine. I think that was the 4 people. They were all pretty high on the recognition list at the time. And at one point or another, one of the students was calling circle left, and the instructor at the time, I won't mention names, yelled, oh, he was calling circle right. And then he said Alaman left. And the instructor said, oh, wait a minute. The guys really have to change direction to do that. That's kind of awkward. And I pointed out, you mean like the girls have to do the other 99% of the time?
Yeah, exactly.
I was supposed to be a student back then.
I have a story to share, and it may trigger a few others for those of you that are there. I was doing a festival with 3 or 4 other callers. They were all male. There'd never been a woman on the staff for that particular festival. And I had to be on top of things so that I didn't get left out. It was, I looked over one time, we were in between something, and they're all gathered together and cloistered together, heads are all in together, and they're talking about something. And I thought, well, I wonder what they're deciding or what they're talking about. So I just went over and put my arm around one of them, and I said, what are we talking about? And they looked at me so shocked, like, what are you doing here? And they were deciding what singing call they were going to do for the next tip. Well, I kind of have to know that as well, but that had not dawned on them. Same festival. I had someone there that was helping me sound the hall, and I trusted their judgment 100%. So if that person said, you know, through our signals, the music's too loud or the voice is a little bit too loud, whatever, you know, I would adjust. And I was watching that person, and I was making some adjustments, not just on my sound, but on some of the others. And one of the other callers said, why did you touch so-and-so's sound? I said, because the sound guy there said it needed to be adjusted. He said, if he wants you to touch his sound, he'll ask you. And I said, okay, you guys go ahead and be loud and I'll be good, but take it away. And for the rest of the festival, people were complaining that, well, saying, gosh, we can hear you so great, but we can't hear those other guys. Their sound was too overdriven is what the problem was. But I don't know if that would have been something that they would have done to any new guy or that was on the program, or if it was gender driven. I'm not really sure. But that was something that I've also had men dancers come up to me and tell me how to set my sound. I don't think they would do it to a male caller, but they will come up and tell me, you need more bass, you need more treble. So I went to my father, who was my go-to guy for all sorts of things when it came to dealing with people. And I told him what the situation was. And he said, make them take responsibility for what they are experiencing. He said, when they come to you griping about the sound and telling you how to fix it, ask them, to tell you exactly what they are experiencing. So I took my little nugget, and by golly, I went back on stage, and here comes some guy, and I said, tell me exactly what you are experiencing. And he said, I can't hear your voice above the music. I said, I can fix that. He said, okay. Back he went. You know, his problem is solved, and whether I ever touched a knob or not, he doesn't know, but he feels heard and validated. And for me, that was magic. When I could, because he had to take responsibility for what he was hearing. And he might have gone up and complained to a male caller as well if he couldn't hear, because, you know, if they can't hear, kids, they can't dance. I love when they'll say, we can't hear over here in that corner. And I tell them, well, then don't dance there. Problem solved. Get thee to the back of the hall. If the sound's too loud in the front of the hall, go dance in the back. If you can't hear in the back, come on down. But take responsibility for yours, and then I can help you with your issue. But I have had dancers come up and tell me how to set my sound, where to put my equipment, all kinds of stuff like that. And I tend to think that some of that is a little bit more gender-driven than we'd like to maybe think. And I have one more thing before I hush, because I want you guys to finish this up. Many, many years ago, I had a vocal problem, huge vocal issue. I had to go and see a laryngologist. I went to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. I was referred to the grandfather of modern day laryngology. He was the best of the best. He worked on anybody who was everybody in Hollywood. And here I go to see him, me, this little square dance caller. And I'm sitting in his office and I'm looking at this giant in the industry, and his business card is this little simple card. I still have it to this day. And it had his name, Hans von Leyden, MD, and the address and phone number. Excuse me, that was about it. And I said to him, pardon me, you are a giant in your profession. And yet you have the simplest business card I have ever seen in my life. And he said something to me I've never forgotten. He said, well, and he had a very thick German accent, so I hope you can understand me. He said, well, I have found that if you're very, very good at what you do, you don't have to blow your own horn because others will blow it for you. And I just loved that. And I have kept that to my heart along with his business card all these years, been over 30 years. And so I feel very fortunate that I got that little bit of advice. Just got to be really, really good at what you do, girls. Really good. And guys, you can help.
I have a particular question of a situation that I run into because, well, to start, my dancers are older. So especially men, they very much want to help me, especially when it comes to carrying equipment. Now, mind you, my equipment doesn't weigh any more than my child does. So that's not an issue. But how do I bridge? I want, especially if I buy new equipment, I want to handle it, but I don't want to offend them. And it feels like such an argument and a battle.
I don't like anybody to put my equipment away for me or pack it. That's something I have to do because everything has to be how it needs to be for me. But I will accept any help carrying anything out. And what I have done with that, in my mind, what I'm doing is I am allowing them to show me their courtesy and respect, the kind that they were raised with. The kind that would make their mother proud to see that their son helped a lady. And I'm okay with that. That makes him feel good. It puts a little deposit in his self-esteem bank. And I appreciate the help. I've got a lousy shoulder and had a hip replaced. So I appreciate having some of that help to come out.
Hey, Deborah.
Yo, Terry.
Terry. Hi. One thing I've learned to do with people, like if I have a piece of equipment I'm careful with, I just say, I don't mind you handling that. It's $1,500 deposit for you to take.
That's a good one. Yeah, if you drop it, it's going to cost you $1,500.
Deborah, I agree with you. I like to pack and unpack and set up my stuff. But if somebody wants to carry it, whatever their reasons are, by all means. So
I remember one lady caller in Canada. She was very particular about her equipment, and she always had a couple of extra boxes. She said that was the spare stuff. If you want, can you just help me carry it? And they were just weighted boxes. They just gave somebody something to carry. I have no idea why she did that, but she was very particular about it.
Oh, how cute. She was just allowing people to
help her
show
out.
off their manners a little bit.
Yeah. She always kept all the good stuff. I'd like to go back just for a second. One of the things I just curious about your expectation.
Mel, before you do that, since we've done the hour, I want to make the formal closing, and then you can come with, for those that have to leave. And if you, as usual, I'm sure Dan will let us stick around for a while, and you can make your comment then. But one, thank you, Deborah, so much for offering to do this, volunteering, accepting my invitation, and for what you did. It was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for the technical background of keeping us all appropriately muted and unmuted and signed in and all that other stuff. A really big thank you to everybody that attended.
Yeah.
We had a nice turnout. Hopefully you all enjoyed our informality as we usually do compared to what class is, although they've got some good stuff going there too. Nice to see some new names. When I'm saying names, I'm talking about Shauna, whose face she chose to keep personal this time. And Mel, I'll see you in about 3 or 4 hours. 4 hours, I guess.
Looking forward to it.
And so officially we're done, but as usual, we're not. As long as there's conversation, you guys don't mind hanging around, go for it. Mel, you were going to ask a question.
I was just, it's more for Deborah. I was just looking for your own experience, and it goes back to what Alan was saying. A lot of the time, lady callers, it's not just dancing half sashayed, but they tend to call with everybody half sashayed in that mental. And what I've found is a lot of lady callers will set up the choreography, for instance, a half sashayed line past the ocean. Not a big difficult thing. But a lot of the choreography is set from a half sachet position, and I find it tends to be, on average, more into the medium to difficult level, because that's where their mind is thinking, much more so than men callers that are learning to call. The choreography is much more complex for lady callers. They actually get the choreography a lot. Maybe the basic fundamentals might be a bit different because they have to think of it from a different perspective. But once they've got that, and they're tracking the lady, the choreography is actually much better flowing, but it's a lot more complex. And
very good point, Mel. Excellent point.
Do you find that becomes one of the negative negative perception variables of lady callers in the US? Here in Australia, and I know in Europe, it's not so much of a big issue because they dance everywhere all the time. But in the US and in parts of Canada when I left, it was very, very standard position only. Anything else is way out in left field, and lady callers tend to venture there much more often than men do. Just what's your take?
My experience was that's exactly what I did when I first started creating choreography. To me, there were no fences, and so I didn't understand why my stuff was tough. I literally didn't comprehend why can't they do that? Why is that so hard? Because I've danced in either way. What difference does it make? Well, it did. And I was so fortunate to have a couple of callers, especially the one that took me that made me come to Phoenix that first time and introduced me to everybody. He's the one who took me aside and said, if you don't get a handle on this and back off and listen to me, you're going to get a reputation as being very tough to dance to. And it's going to limit your calling opportunities. And then he sat me down and began to teach me why something was considered difficult, those degrees of difficulty. And once I understood that, then I could apply it to what I was creating. But that was exactly my experience, what you were talking about. I had to learn how to back off.
And the reason I brought it up, it's still prevalent more so with lady callers than it is men. But when they go to seek coach mentoring, a lot of coaches will look and discuss choreography at the level they think you're at. So if you're giving me that choreography, I'll discuss that choreography with you. And they tend to take the dancers out of the equation to develop your choreographic techniques rather than the calling techniques.
So this is
So I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. I don't know.
Deborah, do you mind commenting on male and female sharing the stage, which music you would choose, whether you choose the male music or the female music? And should we switch backwards and forwards so that both have to sort of complement each other about having to deal with the different key ranges?
It depends on the ability of, for me, it depends on the ability of the male caller. I am comfortable singing harmony. So I usually will say, let me see what you've got in your, we used to say briefcase, now it's, well, let me see what you've got in your playlist there. And I will pick something and I'll say, I can sing harmony on this, so you take the lead and I'll do harmony. And that makes that other caller comfortable. That's where I want him. I had a caller coach, excuse me, I'm having some problems today with just allergies. A caller coach asked me that tell me that he didn't feel that it was right that I always sing harmony because that meant I was always playing second fiddle. And I said, but what matters to me is the end product. I don't care who's playing which fiddle. I just want the end product to be pleasant for the dancers. So there are some callers who sing harmony with me, but that's usually pretty rare. I have found that, especially if it's somebody I haven't worked with, it's easier for me to go through their stuff and pick out something, and I'll find a crack of some kind that I can fill vocally, and we'll be okay. That's me personally.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I've had a number of things in the background, or number of things in the chat about kind of what does vocal range mean and what do these terms mean. So if anybody's got questions about that and kind of music theory, one of the things I've realized as I've been taking voice lessons and talking with callers about music is that we don't have a good introduction to music theory for square dance callers. So I've been thinking about making a video. So if folks want to hit me up with questions they have about music, things about range like this, I will try to put that into some sort of presentation for y'all.
That would be great, Dan. In fact, anybody who has suggestions on presentations they want would be appreciated. Again, mail, email, either Facebook message me, because you can find me there easily, or email to donbeck@donbeck.org. But that sounds good, Dan. It's something that you've got a good feel for and a good grasp of.
I've found that the best way to learn something is to try to figure out enough of it that I can explain it effectively to somebody else. So
that's very true.
Deborah, I just want to say congratulations. We hit 45, which is going to be an excellent benchmark to pass.
Awesome.
I'm going to have to invite you over to my session so we can actually get some of the numbers up.
That'd be great. This was great. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you, Don, for asking me to be a part of it. I enjoyed it, and it would be lovely to be in a utopia where gender doesn't matter, but it still influences so much of what we do in so many different fields. And it was nice to kind of hone in a little bit on this, and I felt that we kept it on a good positive note, and I was very pleased to be a part of it, and I thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, for technical help. I'm out of here.
Definitely a positive note, Deborah. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. For those of you that want to hear, I'm just going to put a little product plug in here, Don. For those of you that want to hear a little bit more about mental imaging, I've got Don Beck coming over to the ASH series here at 9 o'clock Australia time, which is in about 4 hours. There's a video presentation on the Callers in Training and on the Newbie Caller site, which is Don's introduction. It's a great opportunity to pick the minds of one of the masters. He's not going to be giving that presentation as far as I know, but I'll let him deal with that. What he is going to be doing is making himself available to explain the nuances and answer questions, because this is something that will take forever and ever and ever to master, and take you 5 minutes to learn the basic principles and a lifetime to use it effectively. It works with every single calling system you've got. Be it module, be it site calling, be it isolated site, be it crams, it works. I think the best way of explaining it is the old expression from
going on talking.
The cartoons, the damn shit works. And you can't argue with success. So come on over at 9 o'clock Sydney, Australia time. That's about 4 hours from now. And watch the video and download the introductory paper from, they're both on the link as well.
You know, Dan, Mel, this is probably one of the least prepared talks I've ever given, because it depends on the questions. It depends on who's gotten so far and where they are with the understanding of what mental image is. And hopefully people will have looked at the video and gone from there. It's not going to be the teaching session that I'm planning, but it will hopefully be of interest to all of us. I know it will be to me, to see what kind of feedback and questions we get.
Yeah, well, what I've been doing, I've been going through your video with terminations with everything except the number one couple blacked out, and watching the sequencing, and it actually flows well and works well, so you don't have to try and shuffle your dolls on the magnet, on the magnetic board. But,
I will be using terminations. I found that works pretty well, so I don't have to focus the camera on the board. But
yeah, I just black 3 couples out, so you get to see the number one man and the number one lady, but you only have to track the number one man or the number one lady.
SD with square view gives you, square desk rather, gives you the option of showing just the number one man.
Yeah.
But I find it's easier for me to understand terminations and how they want things talked about. Anyway, I listened to the entire video too, just to, again, almost for the first time listening all the way through, just to remind myself what I'd said and what I didn't. And I enjoyed listening, but I had a personal bias there. Anyway, I'll see you guys in 4 hours, 3 hours. I can't remember what you said.
Well, 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Anyway, I got to bow out. Thank you all